Hello, welcome to Potting Plants with Plant Salon. I'm Nika Vaughan, the owner of Plant Salon, and we're going to talk about 3 different times you might want to pot up your plant. Okay, there's 3 times that pretty generally you're going to want to repot your plant. If it has maybe outgrown its current pot, if you bought a new plant and it looks like it's like so tight in its pot that you're like, it's like little pants. You kind of need to give your plant new bigger pants. It's time to go ahead and pot it up a size. Or if you cut and made some propagations and you're like, it's time to go ahead and get these potted in some soil to make a new plant, that's when you might want to get started and find your potting mix you like, get some pots together, and we're going to walk through potting directly into a pot with drainage holes, potting back into another nursery pot, and using a cachet pot. So yes, cachet, cache pot, one of these guys. So let's start off with what does it look like when it's overgrown. The one I want to show you guys today, because it's cute, is this is a lemon maranta, and it's got a little stem. It's like so big that, I'm not even gonna take this guy off. It's so big that it's dwarfing the pot that it's in. I think that's a great way to say, when do I repot my brand new plant? Typically, when you're bringing a brand new plant home from the plant shop, give it a chance to acclimate in its new place you're gonna put it on the shelf, right? So it's a whole new set of lights, humidity, you have to figure out its watering. That's already enough of a shock for both you and this plant. So if you were to jump right off the bat with a sensitive plant and put it in a new pot, that's a shock to its roots on top of all the other changes that it's experiencing. So it is really recommended to kind of give it like a week or 2 of acclimating in its new environment. If though, you found a pot you are in love with and you're like, I am recreating an architectural digest situation in my home and this pot it needs to happen and this plant needs to be in here, then go ahead and do it. When you're going to repot up, keep in mind that if you go to take it out of its pot, and this one's kind of bushy, you can kind of see like when you barely can start to see the old pot, that is a nice sign that it's not going to look super small in its new pot. It could hold the visual space of a larger pot underneath it. So let's take it out of this nursery pot, this plastic pot, and see what the roots look like. I don't know. Those roots, they look good, they look happy. They could have stayed in this size, the 6-inch plastic nursery pot. They could have stayed in there for at least till spring and they would have been very happy. But the other compromise would have been to keep it in here. And this is what I would do, is I would have kept it in here and then I maybe would put rocks or bricks or something inside, like one brick, like inside of this bigger pot, and then just set it in like that. And that is a cheat, especially for anyone who's new to potting plants and you kind of have like a plant support friend who comes over to help you take care of your plants and you're like, they're not coming for a week, they're out of town, I just need to have this happen tonight because I have something going on in my house. You can totally cheat and just put we love putting like a rolled up tin foil inside of a bigger thing. And you can kind of just crunch it down in there. And it's like a quick way to style a pot without having to go through the whole process of repotting. So there's that. So we are going to be brave and we're going to go ahead and do a little repotting right now. Because these roots, we don't need extra space. We're not repotting because of space. I want to make sure that I don't go up so much in size that there's excess soil around this plant. If you put a plant in too large of a pot, what will happen is your soil will stay damp and wet for longer than it'll take too long to dry out between waterings. And so then the plant's like, okay, I've used all the water I need and there's still too much water in here. And that's when you get into this overwatering situation because you're like, why does it take so long to dry out? Because there's so much spongy soil in your pot in the first place. So when you are repotting, it's a good idea to aim for something that's 1 to 2 inches wider in diameter than the pot it's coming from. So like a 6-inch plant, like this was a 6-inch pot, so you might want to go to a 7 or 8-inch pot, and that's it. And that, especially when you're still kind of getting the hang of potting plants, there are rules you can bend and rules you can break, but that's a good way to stay on the safer side to prevent overwatering. Another trick though, if you're like, I bought a pot, Nika, and this plant is going in that pot, is to then doctor your potting soil to make it drain faster. But we will talk about that a different day. We'll talk about that a different day. I found, this is a Loretto pot. Yes, I love this. It reminds me of summer, even though summer is gone. You know, if you're like super into like a Scandi mod kind of look, it's such a cute pot. This does have a drainage hole. It is super thick, like 1-inch thick terracotta. It's just a terracotta pot. It just looks cooler. I am going to put this guy in here, and I want to just make sure size-wise that it's not, oh yeah, it's not too big. I'm gonna have about 1 inch, 2 fingers width. It's a good way to think about it. It's 2 fingers width is the max I would want between the root ball and the new pot, the inside. And something to keep in mind for when you're like styling these plants in your home is, where am I gonna put this in my home? And does the plant have a front? Is this gonna be somewhere where I'm gonna be walking around the plant, or does the plant naturally have a front to it as I make the huge mess? Does the plant have a front to it? So this, on this side, you can tell how it's potted. Everything is a little maybe shorter, or it was growing towards the light. This is clearly the front of it. So when I pot it, I'm going to pot it so that it's centered and I'm aware of where the front is, so that when I go to place it on my shelf or on my table, I can already go, okay, this is how it's gonna flow and be styled in this space. Okay, so I'm gonna show you a cheat. You might notice this pot, even when I put the root ball on the table next to the pot, you're like, okay, Nika, there's gonna be like a lot of dirt underneath this plant once you get it in there. Isn't that too much dirt? And so, yes. But if you want to pot it in here directly and you're like, oh, it's gonna be too much dirt, I'm risking overwatering, a great little cheat is to use another potting medium that is chunky, that allows for drainage. So you might remember, if you have like, you know, a relative, maybe a grandma, who used to put like pieces of broken terracotta or crockery at the bottom of the pot to like, allow for drainage. And like, we don't do that anymore. We don't need to do that. So I don't want to think people should be doing that kind of thing. But what we're gonna do is use a chunky perlite. And perlite is very porous. So perlite wants to have water flow through it. It's gonna pull water down. And I'm putting in enough where I'm keeping in mind where I want my plant to sit in this pot. And this is a super cheat. This is like saying, I am so dedicated to using this pot, this is why I'm doing this. If I had a smaller pot that was a snug fit, I would not need to do this step. But this is like saying, I bought this and I love it and this is going in my house, okay? So I put enough of this, really, it's like super chunky perlite, but look what it does. That's why it's different than using rocks or pebbles or broken pottery, because it's very porous. It's going to help increase drainage so that there isn't excess water sitting with the roots. As this plant grows over time, if I were to leave it in this pot, in this setup through spring, what I might find in the springtime is that the roots will have grown into this perlite. So I probably am not gonna need to repot this like for a while, especially like if I get to the springtime, I might find that the roots of this plant have even grown into the perlite. But if they're not growing out the bottom, they're not growing out the top, and she's happy, then she can stay in here for a really long time. It's only if I were to notice that she's so happy, she's, you know, her natural is just too big and fluffy again, then that might be a time for me to get her out of the pot and investigate. And at that point, what's neat is, because we're using this kind of like It's almost like a chicken cutlet for a bra kind of situation. It's a little bit of that. At that point, if she was a bigger, bushier plant, I would take all this extra perlite out, go ahead and just pot it like it's a normal, potting mix, and put my bigger plant back into the same pot. So that's a little way to cheat that step. All right, so now I've got it pretty much filled up almost halfway with this perlite. I am going to put in, this is just our Plant Salon house potting mix. And it is a mix of coco coir, peat moss, No. 3 coarse perlite, and worm castings. And I am gonna work it in a little bit to the top of that perlite. And I'm pressing down to get out any voids of air. So there's pockets of air just from how things settle in there. And if ever you pot something and then you go to water it and suddenly you get these huge little holes or little cave-ins in the soil, it's because there was an air pocket there and then the water broke through. And you needed more soil in the pot. So what I'm trying to do now is just kind of preemptively get those air pockets out. That feels good. Let's see. And I kind of think of this step like positioning, like if ever you're, putting like a hair accessory in and you're like, right here or right here, right here or right here. Don't feel like you're committing just because it made contact, we're done, that's it. No, you can kind of move this around, and sometimes when you're potting different plants, you might be even potting something off center, like a pothos plant, so it really trails to the front. If you're putting new growth somewhere on the side of the pot, or if something is kind of lopsided and you're trying to compensate. So don't be afraid to get your root ball in there and find the best spot for it. You do want to keep a gap from the top of the pot to the top of the root ball. There needs to be a place for the water to settle when you pour it. So if you pot all the way so that it's parallel to the top of your pot, and then when you go to water it, and you are someone who does not like soil spilling over everywhere in your home, you will not be happy. So you want to give yourself a little wiggle room so that as the water can pool, it has somewhere to pool. So we're gonna make sure we find this nice little sweet spot. And I think where's our front? That's our front, right? Yeah, so I'm gonna put them centered. I might put one more scoop. I want her up a little bit more perched. 2 more scoops, I lied. I like that. Looks good. So now I'm gonna take my shovel out. I'm just gonna use my hand, and I'm going to fill in the space around the plant and make sure that the soil is evenly distributed. And then I'm gonna keep my hands open and press in. If you have fancy nails, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, get your hands in there. That's what nail brushes were invented for. So I'm pushing out those voids. So you can see when my hand sinks in, that's because it's compacting the soil a little bit. So I'm compacting my soil a little bit. And again, you don't have to be so like particular about each one of these little steps. So if you're like, oh my gosh, is it compact? Is it tight enough? It's just to make sure there's no air bubbles. So don't feel like you have to it doesn't need to feel like a sidewalk or like compacted sand. It's once that root ball is covered, you're at the same level with the root ball you put in the pot. You've left a gap for water to be able to pool. I'm gonna get my plant pushed in there a little bit, and that's pretty good. What do you think? Now, if you have embraced propagating some cuttings and you're like, it's time for them to get potted up, and maybe you're like, I kind of feel like they're still baby plants, they're just ready for that next step of getting potted, but they're still pretty small and gingerly. This is a great little step, but we're just gonna use a nursery pot with a cash pot, and this does not have drainage, so that's why we're going to start off with a nursery pot. This has lots of holes, so when you are worried about Overwatering, especially like with a plant that does not have roots yet. So how is it even taking up all this water? It's got to get like a little bit of water at a time. It doesn't need a lot. You want to make sure you're using a pot in general that has really good drainage for these new baby plants. I think one of the easiest ways to start playing with propagation is with a succulent type plant. And this is a rickrack plant. It is like a tropical cactus, and it does grow these wonderful aerial roots, like right from the stem of it. This whole long section is the stem. And then when it's really happy, it'll grow these little like hairy bits off the ends, little spines, and those are the leaves. So this is a vining plant, and this piece is an end cutting from my rickrack plant. I probably cut it, I think we cut it on Tuesday, so it's been 2 days or so, calloused. Because it's a succulent, I want to let it callus over so that that wound is not open to any moisture I'm going to be inserting it into in this new pot. It won't get an infection, right? These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think I have like 7 pieces here. And one of the reasons why I have so many of this cutting that I'm going to be potting up is when we talk about how absorbent our potting mix is, if there's not a lot of roots to make use of the water in the potting mix, one way to kind of cheat it and not have a million individual little 2-inch pots is to group your cuttings all into one pot. Not only does this help make better use of that volume, that single volume of potting mix, so that there's like 7 new little plants trying to all grow roots in there at once. And these are individual plants. So this is going to grow its own roots, this is going to grow its own roots. But because this is a vining plant, as it starts to grow and fill this pot, this is going to be my vining pot. And I have here what is this called? This is the tart-footed pot. And I think it's going to be so cute to have like, this nice little like weird geometric shaped kind of plant trailing out of a tall-footed pot. So this is the decorative pot. This is our growing pot. And then I'm gonna start off by just use my hand. This is a little messy. I'm just using, again, my Plant Salon potting mix. And because there's no root ball to pot into the plant, I'm gonna go ahead and fill up this whole nursery pot to the lip. So like where this ledge starts, because when I go to water it, that's gonna be the gap where water can pool before it kind of moves through the pot. I don't wanna pot it all the way up to the top, right? So now that I've added my potting medium to, my potting mix to my nursery pot, I'm gonna give it some pats, and you'll see maybe some of the loose bits fall out the bottom. And all I'm doing again is pushing to make sure there's no like big pockets of air in there. And I am actually, you don't have to use a root growth hormone, but this is a great little starter. It's kind of like taking like a multivitamin for your plant. It has a little bit of a fungicide in it to help prevent root rot on any newer, really sensitive and vulnerable baby plants. And it also has some stuff just to get your roots going. So all you're gonna do is you kind of take it in, you kind of just give it a dip. I'm gonna tap some out on the base. When you are potting up succulents and cactuses, you want everything to stay on the dry side. That's why we let the cuttings callus. And that is why this is a very dry mix. The Maranta that I just potted up, like I probably will give that a drink of water as the very last step before I even put it on the shelf it's gonna go. This, I'm gonna keep it on the dry side and let it get really kind of situated in the pot, and then maybe like in a day or two, I might give it a light drink of water. Because this is a tropical cactus, it does not need a lot of water. It definitely likes to dry out between waterings. And again, these are cuttings. They don't even have roots to take in a lot of water at this point. So this should be a definitely more dry process. And what I'm doing right now is I'm using my finger. You can use a steel probe or your finger, and I'm just nestling the vines in different directions into the pot. I want to be mindful of how this thing's going to grow up and out, right? It's kind of like sideshow bob hair. So as I place the vines in here, I just want to be mindful of the direction they're going to grow, that they're going to grow up and out. This is a vining plant. It's kind of be like sideshow bob hair, very full and luscious. So I don't necessarily want them all grouped to one side. Something that I'll do sometimes, and this is a tricky one, I'm probably not going to plant this one right now. I might plant this like flat on a larger piece, and this is the reason why. It has been cut on both ends, and they did not mark which way. This is a team effort at Plant Salon. So they didn't mark which way is up. And the plant isn't going to grow upside down. But because it's a vining plant and it even has a little aerial root growing out right here along the spine, if I laid it flat, because think of how it grows out in the wild, right? It's growing on a tree branch and it's making contact with moss or something, and it would root into that moss. I can get it to root maybe flat on some soil, but if I plant it upside down, it's not going to do anything. So I'm going to plant this a different way, different time. These are all end pieces. That one's okay. I know that's top. And so I'm just going to finish using my finger to kind of poke in. I'm tucking about one good leaf depth in. So maybe like an inch. Enough where the leaf, the stem feels really anchored in the pot. If that makes sense. I'll turn it around. And if you ever see these in like plant shops or garden centers sometimes, you'll notice that, especially with this plant, they'll be like anywhere from like 4, 6, oh, came out, 4, 6, a dozen stem cuttings all in the same pot. Let's use a little more. Just to kind of give a little bit more support to our stems. And give a wiggle, give a wiggle. I didn't go crazy with the root growth hormone for these because I'm going to put this on a shelf and I will be like, I'll see you in the spring. So I'm not super worried about babying this along to the next step. Everything feels like it looks, you know, pretty good. It's in there. Let's check it out. Oh, I love it. It's going to look so good. So this is going to grow in, and that is our new baby plant. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions on like what I use, different steps, if you even have your own tips and tricks, I would love to hear them. Thank you again, and don't forget to like and subscribe for our Plant Salon channel. See you next time.